Sometimes in life, you think you know the story you are living. You believe you understand the people around you. You tell yourself a story about love and belonging, a story where you are chosen, cherished, important. I used to believe that story. For years, I did. Until one moment on a rainy afternoon when everything changed. It started in the quietest way. No shouting, no anger. There was only silence and then a door opening. The sound of raindrops against the kitchen window, the faint smell of coffee in the air, and a look in my husband's eyes that I had never seen before. That was the day she came back. Her name was Anna. Even now, years later, her name fills the room with something heavy. She was his first love. Sometimes, someone's first love leaves a mark that nothing else can touch. I heard stories about her, of course, in small pieces. I thought it was just the past. I thought the pain had healed. But hearts do not always heal the way we hope. The truth is, he married me to forget her. I did not know it at the start. Maybe, deep down, a part of me was afraid to know. I loved him. I wanted to be chosen. I tried to make our home warm, our life quiet and safe. But the hardest thing about love is learning when you are not the first choice, when you may not have been a choice at all. This is the story of the day I finally understood. It does not have angry words or broken plates. It has silence. It has the sound of rain. It has the quiet ache of realizing what love can mean, and what it sometimes cannot. If you have ever felt invisible beside the memory of someone else, perhaps you will understand. Sometimes, loving someone means learning how to let go. Sometimes, understanding comes gently, like rain on the windows, too soft to wake you until it soaks you through. This is my story. This is the story of learning that I was never his first choice. When I look back now, I can see the small things that led us here. I can see how it was never about sudden storms or dramatic scenes. Instead, life was made up of countless quiet days and moments, one after another like beads on a string. It began long before Anna ever returned, long before I even knew her name. It began simply with me and Michael and Hope. I met Michael when I was 26. I was not searching for anything grand. My life was simple, neat, and quiet. I rented a small apartment on the edge of town, with a view of the park and a crooked old oak tree just outside my window. At night, I liked to read or listen to the radio, wrapping myself in silence. I thought my life was peaceful. Sometimes peacefulness is just loneliness wearing a pretty face. Michael came into my life without warning. He was not loud or showy, not someone you would notice at first. He was, if anything, a little shy. He worked in a small bookstore, and I would see him handling books carefully, as if each one of them mattered. That was something I loved about him, even in the beginning. He had a gentle way of treating things and people, too. Our first conversation happened over a mix-up with a book order. I thought he would be annoyed, but instead he apologized softly, even though the mistake was mine. He offered me a cup of tea while I waited, and we ended up talking for an hour. I remember thinking how easy it was to talk to him, how safe I felt. The world outside seemed quieter after that. Over the months, we began to see each other more. Sometimes we met for coffee on Sunday mornings. Other times, I would visit the shop and we would talk about nothing, just two people sharing a small corner of the world. There was never a big declaration, no fireworks. Michael simply became part of my everyday, and I found myself caring for him deeply. One chilly evening, as autumn slipped into winter, he asked if I wanted to try a little restaurant near the river. We walked together, the cold air making our breath visible. When he reached for my hand, it felt natural, like something that was supposed to happen. I remember feeling a soft warmth in my chest, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something lasting. We dated quietly for almost 2 years. It was not a love story that would be told in movies. There were no grand gestures, but there was kindness and laughter and gentle moments of understanding. My friends would ask if I was happy, and I would always say yes. And most of the time, I meant it. Michael never spoke much about his past. I respected that. I thought everyone has things they wish to keep private. Sometimes, when we were sitting close on the couch, he would grow quiet, staring off as if he was listening for something far away. I never pushed. Love, I believed then, meant trusting someone enough to let them be silent. We moved in together after 18 months. He brought his things over gradually, first a box of records, then a stack of old photographs, then 2 sweaters he tossed on the back of our small couch. I remember opening a drawer one day and finding a faded photo of him with a young woman. They looked so happy, so young. I felt a little sting of jealousy, but pushed it away. Everyone has a past, I reminded myself. When we talked about marriage, it was almost an accident. We were sitting at our small kitchen table, drinking coffee as rain fell outside. Michael reached for my hand and quietly asked if I would want to build a life together, to try for something steady and real. His voice was hesitant, as if he was afraid he'd lose me by asking. I said yes, easily. That was the happiest I had ever seen him, though even then, as he smiled, there was a shadow in his eyes for just a moment before it faded. Our wedding was small. We did not have much money, but my mother made a cake, and Michael's best friend Tom gave a little speech. There were fresh flowers and laughter and the feeling, for at least a day, that something good was beginning. I wore a simple dress, and Michael wore a suit he had borrowed. When we danced, he held me tightly, and for a while the world felt right. We settled into married life the way people do, slowly, quietly, learning the little things about each other. Michael liked to read at night. He always left his shoes by the door. He hated the taste of onions, but loved black coffee. I filled our tiny apartment with potted plants. I clipped recipes from magazines and tried them out, burning more than a few dinners. He would laugh and eat them anyway. Our life was ordinary. Sometimes it was a comfort. Sometimes it felt heavy. But I learned to find happiness in the small routines. The sound of his laughter from the next room, the comfort of falling asleep beside someone who knew my dreams and my worries. Still, sometimes, in the late hours when the apartment was quiet, I would wonder what he dreamt of. I would wake in the night to find him staring at the ceiling, lost somewhere I could not reach. When I asked if something was wrong, he would squeeze my hand and say no, that everything was fine. I wanted to believe him, so I did. The years passed. We moved to a slightly bigger apartment closer to the city. We made new friends, grew our little family, just the two of us, and later, a cat named Biscuit who loved to sleep at Michael's feet. We developed our own routines: Saturday mornings at the market, Sunday walks in the park, evenings spent watching old movies as the rain tapped on the glass. There was happiness in our life. And yet, little by little, I could sense something in Michael, a piece of him that I could never quite touch. He was loving, gentle and kind and careful, but part of him always seemed to live somewhere else. Sometimes, as he washed the dishes or looked out the window, his face wore an expression of longing, as if he were waiting for someone he expected to see. I remember one evening, as we were making dinner together, I asked him about his past. I did not want to pry, but I was curious about the man I loved. He smiled and began to share small stories about his childhood, his parents, the places he'd lived. But when I asked about old girlfriends, his voice grew quiet. "There's not much to say," he told me, setting down a pan. "There was someone a long time ago, but that's another life." I let the moment pass. I believed him. Maybe I wanted to believe him more than I wanted the truth. I thought we were happy. I thought our life was enough for both of us, enough to build a future on. I tried to be a good wife, to make our house a home. I tried to give him all my love, hoping that in time the quiet spaces in his heart would fill with our shared moments. Some nights I felt we were almost there, but love is complex. It has its own history, its own secrets. The people we love carry invisible burdens, old wounds, stories they cannot share. I learned to live with that silence, the way people learn to live with the sound of distant thunder, hoping the storm will pass us by. And so our life continued. Quiet days, quiet nights, the small joys of an ordinary marriage, until on a rainy afternoon Anna arrived, and the life I thought I understood began to shift. Anna's name did not arrive with shouting or tears. It entered our life quietly, almost by accident. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those days that feel neither new nor old. The rain tapped softly on the glass, and I was making tea in the kitchen. Michael came in holding a letter in his hand, looking as if he had forgotten how to breathe. He stood in the doorway, silent. I remember how his fingers shook just a little, holding the envelope. He said my name once, so softly that I almost didn't hear. I turned and saw a look in his eyes, a mixture of fear, hope, and something I could not name. He set the letter on the table and left the room. The kettle clicked off. Steam rose. Time seemed to pause. I waited a few minutes before I picked up the letter. The handwriting was careful, just a few lines on a small white card. "Dear Michael, I hope this finds you well. I am back in town for a while. Maybe it would be good to talk. If not, I understand. Anna, I do not know what I expected to feel, maybe anger or jealousy. But instead, I felt empty. I put the letter down and sat at the table, my hands folded. The sound of rain seemed louder. Michael did not come back into the kitchen for a long time. That night, I watched him as he tried to act normal. He asked me about my day, about work, about the new book I was reading. His voice was too cheerful, his smile too wide. I answered him quietly, and we went through the familiar motions of dinner, dishes, and tea. When he thought I was not looking, I saw him slip the letter back into his coat pocket. In the weeks that followed, something changed between us, almost invisible. Michael grew quieter. He spent more time by the window, staring out as if waiting for something. I tried to bring him back with small things, his favorite cookies, a new book, stories from my day. He smiled, said thank you, but his eyes traveled somewhere else. One evening, as we sat together, I found myself asking, "Will you see her?" The question came out softer than I intended. He paused, looking at his hands. "I don't know," he said. "Should I?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to hold on to him, to close the door on Anna and her memories. But I could see that a part of him was already gone, reaching back to something or someone he could not let go of. "If it will help," I said, "maybe you should." He nodded once, a silent thank you in his eyes. But as he walked away, I felt something crack inside me, a fault line that had always been there, invisible and deep. A few days later, Michael told me he was going to meet Anna. He tried to sound casual, but I could hear the effort in his voice. He put on his old blue sweater, the one he wore when he needed comfort. Before he left, he came to me, standing in the doorway. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me goodbye, but instead, he just looked at me and whispered, "I'll be back soon." I smiled as best I could. "I'll see you when you get home." The hours stretched long after he left. I made tea, then poured it away. I listened to the radio, read a page of my book a dozen times, hearing none of the words. I stared at the rain, thinking about all the things love cannot fix. When Michael returned, he was quiet. He said nothing about Anna, and I did not ask. This became a pattern, small silences threading their way into our days. Sometimes I would notice Michael absent-mindedly drawing shapes on the kitchen table, the same shape over and over, a small looping heart. One evening, I found him sitting on the steps outside, just looking at the sky. "Are you all right?" I asked, standing in the doorway. He looked up and smiled, but it was a tired smile. "I just needed some air, it's nothing." But it was not nothing, it was everything. It was the slow unraveling of trust, the slow drifting apart that happens not in shouts but in sighs. Soon, Michael began to mention Anna's name in small ways. Sometimes he would mention a song they both loved, or a place they used to visit. At dinner, he would tell a story from his past, his face brightening when he spoke of her. I listened quietly, feeling myself shrinking piece by piece. One evening, I asked him gently, "Did you love her?" The question hung in the air between us. The walls seemed to close in. He took a long time to answer. "Yes," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I loved her very much." I nodded and stared at my hands. "Do you still?" I forced the words out, even though it hurt. He looked at me then, really looked at me. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know." I knew in that moment that a part of him still belonged to her, even after all this time. And I wondered if anything I had done or could do would be enough. From then on, the feeling of being second in my own marriage settled over me like a quiet fog. I started to question myself, my worth, my place in Michael's heart. I tried to tell myself it did not matter, that our life together was real and good. But the doubts grew louder in my mind. At night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wishing I could open his heart and see what lay inside. Sometimes I caught him dreaming, a name on his lips that was not mine. I tried to ask fewer questions. I tried to be understanding. But inside, I was afraid all the time, afraid that Anna's shadow was growing longer, stretching across every room in our house. We pretended things were normal. We went to the market on Saturdays, nodded at neighbors, smiled for photos at family dinners. Only I knew how heavy my heart had grown, carrying the unseen weight of another woman's memory. One Sunday, as we sat at the breakfast table, Michael told me quietly that Anna had asked if they could meet again. He waited for my reaction, searching my face. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. I tried to sound generous, but inside I felt empty. He thanked me, almost too quickly. As he left, he squeezed my shoulder as if that small touch could make things better. After he was gone, I stared at the half-finished cup of tea in my hand, watching the milk swirl slowly in the pale liquid. It was spring when Anna came to our home for the first time. She brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, smiling politely as she stepped over the threshold. I greeted her, trying not to show how nervous I felt. Michael introduced us, his voice careful. Anna was soft-spoken and kind, her eyes bright with some invisible story. I could see why he had loved her. We had tea together, the three of us. The conversation was polite, almost too careful. We talked about the weather, about books, about life in the city. Michael laughed more that afternoon than I had heard in years. After Anna left, the house felt emptier. I found a single yellow flower from her bouquet lying on the floor. I picked it up and placed it in a glass, feeling my hands shake. Slowly, Anna became a quiet presence in our life. Sometimes Michael would spend the afternoon with her, saying they were catching up. Sometimes he would come home a little later than before, apologizing softly, bringing me a muffin or a flower as if to make amends. I told myself I was strong enough to wait this out. I told myself that love, if real, could survive anything, that I could be patient, that Michael would choose me again and again. But each time he left to see Anna, each time he laughed at one of her old jokes or remembered a story from their past, I felt my heart grow smaller. Friends started to notice. My mother asked if everything was all right. I told her yes, that we were just busy, that sometimes life was complicated. I did not want to share my worry, my fear of losing everything I had built. But the truth was, our life together was changing. Slowly, gently, almost invisibly, but changing all the same. Michael was never cruel, he never raised his voice. But sometimes I would catch him staring into space, lost in thought, a soft smile on his lips. And I knew deep down that he was somewhere else with someone else, living in a memory that did not include me. I tried to talk to him. One evening, as we washed the dishes together, I asked, "Are you happy?" He dropped a plate and it clattered in the sink. He looked at me, startled. Then he nodded, forced a smile, and said, "I am, I promise." But I saw the hesitation. I saw the sadness. That night, I wrote in my journal, the words blurring as I tried to find comfort in them. What if I am only the one who stayed? What if I am only a place to rest until he remembers where he belongs? As the days went by, I realized that love can be gentle and still break your heart. That sometimes, loving someone means watching them ache for something that isn't you. I still wanted to hope, but the hope was quieter now, softer, wrapped in the sound of rain and late-night silence. And all I could do was wait, for Michael, for an answer, for something that would help me understand what place I truly held in his heart. I remember the exact day everything truly changed. It was not dramatic, not loud. It was as if a gentle breeze finally pushed open a door that had always been cracked. Morning began like any other, quiet, with pale sunlight creeping through the kitchen window, catching on the dust motes in the air. Michael was already awake when I came downstairs. He was standing at the sink with his back to me, coffee in hand, looking out at the small garden behind our building. The radio played quietly, a piece of hopeful piano music. I stood for a moment, just watching him. He seemed older somehow, more tired. "Good morning," I said. He turned, smiled a small smile. "Morning." We made breakfast together, moving around each other in silence. I noticed his hands trembled a little as he sliced bread. Neither of us spoke of Anna, but her name hovered between us like a ghost. After we ate, he told me that Anna had invited us both to her apartment for tea. I felt a small pang of nerves, but nodded. I tried to act natural, tried to be a good wife, supportive and steady. That afternoon, we walked across the city to Anna's building, the sky threatening rain. Michael was quiet the whole way, glancing at me now and then, his expression hard to read. When we arrived, Anna greeted us with a warm smile and open arms. She wore a yellow dress and sunlight seemed to follow her into every room. Her apartment was simple, filled with small touches, a stack of old books, fresh flowers in jars, framed photographs on every wall. The three of us sat together in her narrow living room, drinking tea and talking. It was so polite, so careful, it almost hurt. I watched Michael relax in her presence, saw him laugh in a way I had not seen for years. At times, Anna would touch Michael's arm or look at him with a kind of familiar kindness. I tried not to notice, tried to focus on the conversation. But inside, I felt like something was unraveling, and I could do nothing to stop it. A moment came when Anna left the room to fetch more tea. Michael and I sat together in silence, the only sound the ticking of a clock on the wall. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Of course," I answered, but the words felt strange in my mouth. He reached for my hand, held it gently between his own. His touch was warm but distant, as if even now his thoughts were elsewhere. "I know this has been hard for you," he said, eyes fixed on the floor. "It's all right," I managed, but it was not. It never had been. Michael squeezed my hand. I don't know what to do. Sometimes I feel like I'm split between two lives. I'm sorry." I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was sadness. My heart hurt for both of us. "I just want you to be happy," I said, and I meant it even though I wished that happiness included me. Anna returned and the conversation drifted on, but something had changed. The warmth of the room seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet, growing ache. I watched the way Michael looked at Anna, the softness in his gaze. I noticed how their laughter sounded. It belonged to another time, a time before me. After that day, Michael seemed to grow even more distant. He spent more time away, more time with Anna, telling me he needed to sort out his feelings, needed space to think. I tried to give him that space, but it felt like standing in an empty house, waiting for something that was never coming back. One evening, he came home late. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of cold tea in front of me. He looked exhausted, eyes red, hair still damp from the rain. He sat across from me, folded his hands. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, bracing myself. He took a long breath, looking everywhere but at me. "I care about you, more than you know. You've made my life better. You are steady and kind, and I don't want to hurt you." I waited for what was coming, my heart already trying to protect itself. "But Anna, she's come back, and it feels like I've been given a second chance at a life I was never able to finish. I know this isn't fair to you. I know it must hurt. I wish things were different." I wrapped my hands around my mug, searching for the right words. "Do you love her?" He nodded quietly. "I think I always have." There was a long silence. I stared at my tea, watching the ripple in the liquid. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. "What about us?" I asked, my voice unsteady. He shook his head. "You are important to me. I care for you so much, but I don't think I ever stopped being in love with Anna, even when I tried. Even when I thought I was ready to move on." A soft, dull ache spread through me. All those quiet moments, all the silent nights, they made sense now. He had been trying to fill a space in his heart that belonged to someone else, and there was nothing I could do to change that. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out into the rainy street. The lights from passing cars reflected on the wet pavement, stretching into pools of gold and silver. When I turned back, he was watching me, his face full of regret. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said again, and I believed him. I did. But sometimes love is not enough to protect us from pain. That night, I slept in the guest room, curled up in a blanket, staring at the ceiling. I could hear Michael down the hall, restless, moving in and out of sleep. I wondered if Anna was thinking of him too, if she knew how much power she still had over his heart. The next morning, the apartment felt colder. Michael tried to act normal, but neither of us could pretend anymore. We moved around each other like strangers, careful not to touch. I made breakfast, set 2 plates on the table. He only managed a few bites. Eventually, Anna called. I heard Michael's voice soften as he answered, stepping into another room. He used a tone with her that he never used with me, a mix of hope and longing, as if he were breathing again for the first time in years. When he hung up, he came back to me and sat down. We did not talk about the phone call. We only stared at our hands. The days passed this way, each one harder than the last. It felt as if the world had narrowed down to a single awful choice: wait for Michael to go, or let him go myself. One afternoon, I found a pile of letters in his drawer. Old letters from Anna, written years ago before I ever met him. They were full of love and hope and apologies, each one more heartfelt than the last. I read a few lines, then stopped, feeling sick. I put them back carefully, my hands shaking. That was when I realized no matter what I did, no matter how much I loved him, I would never be his first choice. I had been perhaps his comfort, his safe harbor, his way of forgetting what he could not have. But I was never the place his heart truly belonged. The next evening, I sat with him in the living room, the sky outside heavy and gray. The air was filled with the sound of distant thunder. "I think you should go," I said quietly. The words barely sounded like my own. He looked at me as if I had spoken another language. "What?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "If Anna is your heart's home, you should be with her. I will be all right. I have to be." A deep sadness passed through his eyes. He wanted to argue, to stay, to be kind, but in the end, he only nodded. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I smiled, though it felt broken. "Me too." He packed his things over the next few days. Each time he took something from the closet or the shelf, I felt a piece of my old life slipping away. The house grew quieter, emptier. On his last morning at home, Michael stood in the doorway, holding his suitcase. I walked him to the door. He paused before leaving, searching for something to say. "Thank you for loving me," he said softly. "Thank you for everything." I nodded, unable to speak. He stepped outside, and the door closed behind him with a soft, final click. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the space he no longer occupied. The rain had started again, heavier this time. I listened to it beat against the windows, carrying away the last pieces of my old life. In those first quiet hours, I felt nothing. Not anger, not relief, just emptiness. But in that emptiness, slowly, the truth became clear. I had loved Michael with my whole heart. I had given him everything I had. But sometimes, love is only part of the story. Sometimes, loving someone means letting them go, even when every part of you wants them to stay. And sometimes, the deepest heartache brings a kind of quiet understanding, a space where, at last, you may start to heal. The days after Michael left were some of the quietest days of my life. At first, every corner of our apartment felt too big and too empty. Each object was a reminder: the mug he always used, the coat he left behind by mistake, even the indentation on the cushion where he used to sit. I wandered from room to room, cleaning not because it needed to be done, but because moving felt easier than sitting still. I took Michael's shirts from the closet and folded them gently, placing them into a box with careful hands. I dusted the shelves, finding old tickets from concerts we attended, shopping receipts with small notes scribbled on the back, lists of groceries, reminders to buy milk or call Mom. There were nights when I would wake suddenly, reaching for him out of habit, finding only cool sheets beside me. Sometimes I cried in the darkness. Sometimes I just stared up at the ceiling, your mind full but your heart strangely numb. My mother called, her voice warm and full of worry. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "I will be," I answered. "Not yet, but one day." Friends came over, bringing homemade soup and small cakes, sitting with me as we watched old movies in silence. Their presence was a comfort, even as I struggled to find words to share what I was feeling. There is a kind of ache you carry quietly, a heaviness you cannot explain to anyone who has not felt it themselves. But slowly, gently, life began to soften around the edges again. The world did not stop because my heart was broken. The sun rose each morning, even when I could not bear to look at it. The rain fell, steady and cleansing, washing the city in a cool gray light. I started to do small things just for myself. I planted new flowers in the window box, choosing bright, stubborn colors. I walked gently in the park, listening to the laughter of children, the call of birds, the sound of leaves brushing together in the wind. Sometimes I brought a book and sat on the same old bench where, years ago, Michael and I had once sat together, sharing secrets and dreams. In time, I dusted off my old hobbies. I began painting again, filling blank sheets with reds and golds and blues. I found comfort in the slow rhythm of brush to paper, in the patience of waiting for colors to dry. Each picture was a quiet reminder that life could begin again, even after deep loss, even after heartbreak. Weeks passed, then months. Sometimes, my sadness crept up quietly, especially in the evenings while making dinner or folding laundry, chores we used to share. But the pain softened, like water rounding off a sharp stone. There were even moments when I caught myself humming, unthinking, a faint tune from another room, a sign that a small light still lived inside me. One afternoon, as spring turned to summer, I walked into the kitchen and caught the scent of coffee and sunlight and something new, the gentle promise of peace. It was in that moment I realized, quietly, that I had survived. Not heroically, not without scars, but I was still here, still breathing, still capable of loving, even when I had not been loved in return the way I had hoped. I thought of Michael often, but with less pain and more gratitude. I remembered the good days, the laughter, the small comforts of two people building a life together. Yes, he had loved someone else more deeply than he ever loved me. Yes, I was not his first choice, not the home of his heart, but I had loved him kindly. I had made a safe space for him when he needed it, and perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it was more than enough. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness, only a quiet understanding that we cannot always choose who we love or who loves us back. We cannot force someone to heal before they are ready. We cannot erase the past or compete with memories. We can only love with open hands, do our best, and hope for gentle endings. A few months after he left, Michael wrote me a letter. It was short and carefully written, full of gratitude and regret. "Thank you for being my friend, my shelter, my quiet place," he wrote. "I hope you find happiness. I hope you know how much you mattered, even when I was lost. I am sorry for every time I could not be fully with you. I wish you all the love in the world." I held the letter for a long time. I wept for all the goodbyes that had been too quiet to say out loud, for the dreams that would not come true, for the tender way two people can drift apart even as they try so hard to hold on. I wrote back, in my own small way. I thanked him for the good days, for the kindness, for the chances he gave me to learn what love can mean, and what it sometimes means to lose. I never saw Anna again. I heard, through friends, that she and Michael tried to build a life together. I don't know if they stayed together or if the happiness they found lasted. Perhaps it did, perhaps it didn't. Life is complicated and hearts are not always predictable. But I was not angry. I wished them peace wherever they ended up. I no longer wanted to compare myself to Anna, to wonder what she had that I could not give. She simply came first, and sometimes that is the only explanation there is. Over time, I learned to forgive Michael, Anna, and also myself. I forgave myself for loving someone who could not love me in the same way. I forgave all my small mistakes, my hopes, my desperate need to be chosen. I realized it was not weakness to love gently. It was not failure to want to matter, to hope for happiness. Still, there are days when the longing returns, the longing to have been someone's first choice, to be the name on someone's lips in the early morning light, the one they reach for without thinking. I suppose some part of me will always ache for that kind of love. But now I see things differently. I see that there is more to life than being chosen first. There is dignity in kindness, strength in quiet endurance. There is peace in forgiving what you cannot change. One evening, almost a year after Michael left, I sat at my kitchen table again, alone, but not lonely. The windows were open, letting in the sound of distant music and children's laughter. I made myself a cup of tea in my favorite mug, the one I used to save for Michael. I took my time, letting the warmth fill my hands. As I sipped, I looked around the home that was now truly mine. I saw sunlight on the walls, flowers in jars, books stacked haphazardly, paintings of hopeful colors. I realized that I belonged here. I belonged to myself now in the gentle, quiet way that only comes after heartbreak has softened. I was not anyone's first choice, perhaps, but I could choose myself. I could choose peace and gentle hope. I could let the past be what it was, painful, beautiful, true, and still step forward, piece by piece, into the light of a new day. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that this, too, was a kind of love. Looking back now, with time and distance, I see my story not just as one of heartbreak, but as a quiet lesson in becoming. For a long time, I thought my life would only ever be measured by the people who chose me, the love stories that stayed. I thought being someone's first choice was the only happiness, the only worthwhile dream. But life gave me something much softer and, in a strange way, much deeper than that. Life taught me to find meaning in patience, beauty in gentle endings, hope in the quietest places of grief. If you asked me today, was it all worth it, loving someone who could not love me back in the same unwavering, first chosen way, I would say yes. Not because the pain was easy, but because it taught me who I am when the old story falls apart. It taught me to look at myself not as someone left behind, but as someone who can stand quietly, calmly, and move on. There are still echoes of old dreams. Sometimes, when rain falls softly against the window, I remember the shape of Michael's laughter or the way sunlight looked on his face in the early days. Sometimes I find an old photograph, a memory captured in happier times, and a quiet ache moves through me. But I do not linger in the past anymore. I no longer compare myself to Anna, no longer measure my own worth by someone else's longing. Their love story was theirs, and it belonged to another time. My story is mine. I know now that there is nothing shameful in loving kindly, in wanting to be someone's first choice, in hoping for happiness even when it does not come in the way you imagined. Sometimes, life's greatest gifts are not the ones you asked for, but the ones you discover after you have let go. I found new friends, gentle, steady souls who did not need grand stories to love me. I learned to trust small joys again, a good meal, a warm sunrise, the laughter of children outside my window. I learned that belonging can begin with choosing yourself, with forgiving everyone, even yourself, for all the dreams that did not come true. Now and then, loneliness still visits quietly like a familiar guest, but I greet it gently. I pour myself a cup of tea, sit by the window, and watch the world outside as it moves and changes and grows. I let the ache be part of me, but not all of me. I hope, whoever listens to this story, you will remember this. It is not weakness to love deeply. It is not failure if someone you love cannot stay, cannot choose you first. Sometimes we are the shelter for someone passing through a storm. Sometimes we are the ones who light the lamp, knowing it is only for a while. There's a quiet heroism in being gentle, in wishing others well even as you let them go. If you too have found yourself living in the shadow of someone else's memory, feeling small and second best, let me tell you, you are not alone. Your story matters, your love matters. The life you build for yourself after the letting go can still be beautiful. It can still be home. Now my days are soft and peaceful. Sometimes I still set two places at the table out of old habit. Sometimes I talk out loud, sharing news from my day as if Michael could still hear me. But mostly I sit in the gentle quiet, grateful for the lessons heartbreak brought. I am not anyone's first choice. I am not the love story that lasted. But I am still here, faithful to my own quiet heart. And in that calmness I find strength. Evenings come and I light a candle for the memories, all of them. Some bright, some painful, all precious. I tuck myself into bed with a good book, listen to the soft hush of the world outside, and trust that tomorrow will bring a little more light. Sometimes love is choosing peace. Sometimes love is letting go, not just of another person, but of the story you thought you needed. You are allowed to write a new story, one of your own, even if it starts alone. If you listened this far, thank you for letting me share my story. May you find kindness for yourself in your hardest moments. May you be gentle with your longing, patient with your healing. May you remember always that love is never wasted, even when it does not look the way you dreamed. This is the gift of heartbreak. It teaches us to love again, starting with ourselves. Good night, wherever you are, and may tomorrow bring you a little more hope, a little more peace, and a gentle new beginning.